20 years ago, a small Texas town was shattered when 16-year-old Elena Ramirez vanished on her way home from the local library. All that remained were her scattered books and a single red hairband lying in the dirt along a quiet country road. For 2 decades, the residents of Cedar Springs whispered about what might have happened that night, while someone among them harbored a terrible secret. Then, a forgotten piece of evidence and remarkable advances in forensic science finally revealed a truth that left the entire community reeling. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Cedar Springs, Texas, June 2001. The summer heat arrived early that year, transforming the small town into a shimmering mirage by day and a chorus of cicadas by night. Located just outside San Antonio, Cedar Springs was the kind of place where most families never bothered locking their doors and children rode bicycles until sunset without a second thought. On the south side of town stood the modest Ramirez home, where Miguel worked as a mechanic at the local garage, and Sophia taught 3rd grade at Cedar Springs Elementary. Their daughter Elena, a bright and thoughtful 16-year-old, spent most afternoons volunteering at the town library, organizing books and helping younger children with reading programs. Elena wasn't particularly popular at school, but she was universally liked. With her long dark hair often pulled back in a red band and wire-rimmed glasses framing her expressive brown eyes, she moved through life with a quiet confidence. She loved classic novels, kept a journal filled with poems, and dreamed of becoming an English teacher like Mrs. Patterson, her favorite instructor at Cedar Springs High. The events that would forever change Cedar Springs began on Friday, June 8, 2001. Elena had stayed late at the library, helping Mrs. Wilcox catalog a new shipment of books. The library clock showed 8:30 p.m. when Elena gathered her backpack, slipped her own dog-eared copy of Pride and Prejudice inside, and headed for the exit. "Are you sure you don't want to ride home, dear?" Mrs. Wilcox called after her. "It's getting dark." Elena smiled and shook her head. "It's only 15 minutes, Mrs. Wilcox. I walk it all the time." The elderly librarian watched from the doorway as Elena set off down Magnolia Street, her figure growing smaller beneath the newly lit street lamps. That ordinary moment, a teenage girl walking home on a warm June evening, would be the last time anyone in Cedar Springs saw Elena Ramirez alive. At home, Sophia Ramirez glanced at the kitchen clock for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. 9 p.m. Elena was usually punctual, never more than a few minutes late without calling. Miguel was working the late shift at Johnson's garage, so Sophia sat alone at the kitchen table, absently flipping through a magazine while the ceiling fan hummed overhead. By 9:30, mild concern had evolved into nagging worry. Sophia dialed the library, but the call went to voicemail. They had closed at 9 o'clock. She tried Elena's cell phone twice, but both calls went straight to voicemail. The second hand on the kitchen clock seemed to accelerate as Sophia paced the worn linoleum floor. At 10:15, Sophia called Miguel at the garage. "Elena's not home," she said, her voice tight with worry. "She left the library almost 2 hours ago." Miguel tried to reassure her. "Maybe she stopped at Sarah's house," he suggested, referring to Elena's closest friend who lived just a few blocks from the library. Sophia immediately called the Peterson home. Sarah answered, confusion evident in her voice. No, she hadn't seen Elena since school that afternoon. No, they hadn't made plans to meet. By 11:30 p.m., the Ramirez kitchen was filled with neighbors. Miguel had come home, his hands still stained with motor oil. Deputy Tom Collins from the Cedar Springs Police Department sat at the table, writing down details: Elena's height, weight, what she had been wearing when she was last seen. "My daughter doesn't stay out like this," Sophia insisted, her accent thickening with distress. "Something is wrong." Collins nodded grimly. In a town like Cedar Springs, a missing teenager rarely meant rebellion. It usually meant trouble. By midnight, the first search party had formed. Neighbors with flashlights spread out along the route between the library and the Ramirez home. Miguel led one group, his voice growing hoarse from calling his daughter's name into the darkness. Officer Collins called in additional deputies from the county sheriff's department, and by 2 a.m., patrol cars crawled slowly down every street in Cedar Springs, their spotlights cutting through the night. It was Deputy Rodriguez who made the first discovery. About halfway between the library and the Ramirez home, where Magnolia Street curved alongside Willow Creek Park, he found a scatter of books lying in the grass near the sidewalk. A biology textbook, a small notebook with a floral cover, and a worn copy of Pride and Prejudice. As dawn broke over Cedar Springs, the search intensified. Officers found a single red hairband, Elena's trademark, tangled in some bushes about 20 feet from where the books lay. Nearby, the grass appeared disturbed, as if there had been a struggle. Most alarming was a small smear of what appeared to be blood on the sidewalk's edge. Sheriff Nathan Hammond arrived at 7 a.m., taking command of what was now officially a missing person investigation. The area around Willow Creek Park was cordoned off with yellow police tape, transforming a once peaceful neighborhood spot into a crime scene. Forensic technicians photographed and collected the scattered items while officers conducted a grid search of the surrounding area. Cedar Springs Police Chief Robert Martinez stood before a growing crowd of concerned residents at the community center. "We have reason to believe that Elena Ramirez did not leave willingly," he announced, his weathered face grim. "We are treating this as a potential abduction." The words fell like stones in the hushed room. In this small town of just 8,000 people, violent crime was practically non-existent. The annual police report typically featured nothing more serious than occasional drunk driving arrests and minor vandalism. The thought that someone had taken a local girl, one of their own, sent a cold wave of fear through the community. By noon, Elena's school photo was displayed on every storefront in Cedar Springs. The local radio station interrupted regular programming with updates on the search. Volunteers gathered at the fire station, receiving maps of assigned search areas. The news reached San Antonio television stations by evening, and by the next morning, Elena's face appeared on the front page of the San Antonio Express News. The Ramirez home became the center of a storm. Friends brought food that remained untouched. The phone rang constantly with offers of help and requests for information. Sophia sat motionless on the living room sofa, clutching a framed photo of Elena from her quinceañera celebration the year before. Miguel moved mechanically between search parties, his eyes hollow with exhaustion and fear. Preparing and narrating. This story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Sheriff Hammond wasted no time in establishing a timeline. Elena had left the library at 8:30 p.m. The walk home should have taken approximately 15 minutes. The discovery site was roughly halfway along her route. Based on this information, whatever happened to Elena likely occurred between 8:35 and 8:45 p.m. Deputy Collins interviewed Mrs. Wilcox again, pressing for details about Elena's final moments at the library. Was there anyone unusual hanging around? Did she mention meeting someone? Did she seem concerned about anything? The elderly librarian shook her head tearfully. She was just her normal self. Happy about finishing the new catalog. Excited about her summer reading program for the kids. Meanwhile, investigators compiled a list of potential witnesses, anyone who might have been in the vicinity of Willow Creek Park that Friday evening. The owner of the corner market, located a block from the park, remembered seeing a few teenagers hanging around outside around 8 p.m., but they had left before Elena would have passed by. A couple walking their dog near the creek reported nothing unusual. The timing of Elena's disappearance, during the dinner hour when most residents were home, meant fewer potential witnesses than there might have been earlier or later. As the investigation progressed, 3 persons of interest emerged. The first was Jason Taylor, a 19-year-old former Cedar Springs High student who had briefly dated Elena earlier that year. Their relationship had ended when Jason graduated, and according to Elena's friends, the breakup had been difficult for him. When questioned, Jason appeared genuinely distressed by Elena's disappearance. He claimed to have been at his cousin's house in San Antonio that evening, watching a basketball game with several friends. His alibi checked out, multiple witnesses confirmed his presence from 7 p.m. until well after midnight. The second person of interest was Martin Green, a 45-year-old janitor at Cedar Springs High. Several students had complained about Green's creepy behavior, including allegations that he sometimes lingered near the girls' locker room. Investigation revealed a prior arrest for voyeurism in Houston 10 years earlier, though the charges had been dropped. Green lived alone in a small apartment just 3 blocks from Willow Creek Park. When deputies questioned him, he became nervous and evasive. He claimed to have been home alone watching television the night Elena disappeared, but had no one to verify his whereabouts. A search of his apartment revealed nothing directly connecting him to Elena, though investigators noted an unusual collection of true crime books focusing on abductions. The third subject was Daniel Walker, 28, who worked at the gas station across from the library. Several people, including Mrs. Wilcox, mentioned that Walker often paid special attention to Elena when she came in, offering her free sodas and engaging her in conversation. Walker had a record, 2 DUIs and a misdemeanor assault charge from a bar fight, but nothing involving minors or sexual offenses. Walker told investigators he had left work at 6 p.m. that Friday, hours before Elena departed the library. His time card confirmed this, and his girlfriend verified that he had been home with her for the remainder of the evening. While his interest in Elena raised eyebrows, there was nothing concrete linking him to her disappearance. Forensic analysis of the scene yielded frustratingly little. The small blood sample found on the sidewalk was confirmed to be human, but in 2001, DNA testing required larger samples than what was available. The books and hairband showed no fingerprints other than Elena's. The disturbed grass suggested a struggle, but summer rain had washed away any footprints or tire tracks that might have been present. As days turned into weeks, the investigation began to stall. Daily search parties dwindled to weekly organized efforts. The FBI, which had sent 2 agents to assist, gradually shifted their focus to other cases. The television crews packed up their equipment and moved on to newer stories. But Cedar Springs changed fundamentally. Parents no longer allowed children to play unsupervised. Teenagers traveled in groups, even in daylight. Doors that had never known locks were now secured with deadbolts. A community built on trust had been transformed by fear. For the Ramirez family, time stopped on June 8, 2001. Sophia took indefinite leave from teaching, spending her days sitting by the phone or walking the route between their home and the library, as if retracing those steps might somehow reveal what had happened to her daughter. Miguel threw himself into the search efforts, spending every free moment distributing flyers across 3 counties. Their marriage, once solid, began to fracture under the weight of grief and uncertainty. Miguel channeled his pain into relentless action, while Sophia retreated into a quiet, private suffering. They rarely spoke anymore, existing like ghosts in their own home, where Elena's bedroom remained exactly as she had left it that Friday morning, bed neatly made, a half-finished poem lying on her desk, waiting for her return. By December 2001, 6 months after Elena's disappearance, the case had officially gone cold. Sheriff Hammond called the Ramirez family to his office for a difficult conversation. "We're not giving up," he assured them. "But I have to be honest, we've exhausted our current leads. The case will remain open, but our active investigation is being scaled back." The news hit Sophia and Miguel like a physical blow. "So you're just going to stop looking for our daughter?" Miguel demanded, his voice rising. Hammond shook his head sadly. "We'll never stop looking. But without new evidence or information, we've hit a wall." As they left the sheriff's office, Sophia turned to her husband with tears streaming down her face. "They've given up on our baby," she whispered. Miguel took her hand for the first time in months. "Then we'll have to be the ones who never give up," he said firmly. True to his word, Miguel continued his one-man crusade to find Elena. He created a website dedicated to her case. He organized community awareness events on the 8th of each month. He pestered law enforcement agencies across Texas, reminding them that his daughter was still missing. Sophia found a different way to cope. She returned to teaching, but with a new mission. She established a safety awareness program for elementary students, teaching them about safe strangers and what to do if they ever felt threatened. The program, which she named Elena's Angels, eventually spread to schools throughout the county. As the first anniversary of Elena's disappearance approached, Cedar Springs prepared for a memorial vigil. The town square was illuminated with hundreds of candles as residents gathered to remember the girl whose fate had changed their community forever. Sophia and Miguel stood together at the center, surrounded by friends and neighbors who had become an extended family in their shared grief. As the years passed, Elena's case gradually receded from public attention. By 2004, the annual vigils had dwindled to a small gathering of family and close friends. The Find Elena posters, once ubiquitous throughout Cedar Springs, faded and peeled from storefront windows, eventually replaced by newer community notices. Life in the small town slowly resumed its rhythm, though a subtle undercurrent of caution remained. Parents still reminded children not to talk to strangers, and teenagers still traveled in groups after dark. For the Ramirez family, there was no return to normalcy. Sophia and Miguel's marriage, strained by different approaches to grief, finally broke under the pressure. In late 2005, Miguel moved into a small apartment across town. The divorce was quiet and sad, not bitter, just two people who could no longer find comfort in each other while drowning in the same sorrow. Sophia stayed in the family home, unable to leave the place where Elena's presence lingered in every corner. She maintained her daughter's room exactly as it had been, dusting the shelves weekly and occasionally replacing the fresh flowers on the nightstand. Miguel buried himself in work, taking on extra shifts at the garage and volunteering with missing persons organizations on weekends. Elena's case file, once at the center of the Cedar Springs Police Department's attention, was relegated to a metal cabinet in the evidence room basement. Occasionally, when a new officer joined the force, someone would mention the Ramirez girl as part of the town's recent history, but concrete investigative efforts had long since ceased. Until January 2015, when everything changed. Sheriff Nathan Hammond was nearing retirement after serving Cedar Springs for nearly 3 decades. As part of his transition, he began reviewing unresolved cases, organizing files for his successor. When he opened Elena's case, memories flooded back, the frantic search parties, the devastated parents, the community transformed by fear. With a heavy sigh, he began sorting through the photographs, witness statements, and investigation notes. Near the bottom of the box, Hammond found a small evidence bag he didn't remember. Inside was a partial fingerprint lifted from the cover of Elena's copy of Pride and Prejudice, marked inconclusive, insufficient ridge detail, 2001. Hammond frowned. Fingerprint technology had advanced considerably since 2001. Perhaps this partial print, deemed useless 14 years ago, might yield results with modern techniques. That afternoon, Hammond called Marcus Rodriguez, now a lieutenant with the Texas Rangers and an expert in cold case investigation. "Marcus, I've got something from the Ramirez case I'd like you to look at," Hammond explained. "A partial print we couldn't process back then." Rodriguez remembered the case well. It had been one of his first as a young deputy. "I'll be there tomorrow," he promised. When Rodriguez arrived, he carefully examined the evidence bag. "Technology's come a long way since 2001, Nathan. We can do a lot more with less now." He placed a call to the state crime lab in Austin. "I'm going to need a priority analysis on a cold case fingerprint. Missing teenager, 2001. The print was carefully packaged and sent to Austin, where technicians used advanced ridge enhancement techniques impossible in 2001. 3 days later, Rodriguez received a call from the lab director. "We've got something," she said. "It's not complete, but there are 12 points of comparison, enough for a database search if your suspect's prints are on file." Rodriguez felt a surge of hope. "Run it through everything, state and federal." For the next 2 weeks, the partial fingerprint was compared against millions in criminal databases across the country. Rodriguez checked daily for updates, trying not to get his hopes up. Cold cases rarely yielded quick results, and after 14 years, the chances of finding a match seemed slim. Then, on February 7, 2015, Rodriguez's phone rang. It was the lab director again, her voice tight with excitement. "We've got a hit," she said. The print matches a David Allen Cox, arrested in Oklahoma last year for aggravated assault. Rodriguez immediately pulled up Cox's file. A 45-year-old man with a history of violence and a recent pattern of escalating behavior. Most importantly, in 2001, Cox had lived in Cedar Springs, working as a delivery driver for a local florist. Rodriguez stared at Cox's driver's license photo. The man had never been on the original suspect list. He hadn't been interviewed. He wasn't connected to Elena in any way they had discovered. Yet his fingerprint was on her book, the book found scattered at the scene of her disappearance. That afternoon, Rodriguez assembled a small team at the Cedar Springs Police Department. Sheriff Hammond, though weeks from retirement, was fully engaged. Cox worked for Bloom and Stem from 1999 to 2002, Rodriguez informed the group. He lived in a rental on Pine Street, less than a mile from where Elena disappeared. Did we ever interview him? Hammond asked, reviewing the old witness statements. Rodriguez shook his head. He wasn't on our radar. The delivery job meant he was familiar with the town, but there was nothing connecting him to Elena directly. Where is he now? Asked Deputy Collins, one of the few officers still in Cedar Springs who had worked the original case. County Jail in Tulsa, Rodriguez replied. Awaiting trial for assaulting his girlfriend. The team worked through the night, building a profile of David Allen Cox. His criminal history showed a troubling pattern, minor offenses in his 20s, escalating to violent altercations in his 30s and 40s. He had moved frequently, rarely staying in one town more than a few years. Most significantly, several of his past addresses were in communities where teenage girls had gone missing, though he had never been considered a suspect in those cases. We need to talk to him, Hammond said firmly. Face to face. 2 days later, Rodriguez and Hammond sat across from David Cox in an interview room at the Tulsa County Jail. Cox was a wiry man with thinning brown hair and deep-set eyes that darted nervously between the officers. We're here about a cold case from Cedar Springs, Rodriguez began, watching Cox's reaction carefully. A missing girl. Elena Ramirez. Cox's expression remained neutral. Don't remember any missing girl, he said flatly. You worked at Bloom and Stem back then, Hammond continued. Delivering flowers all over town. Cox shrugged. Yeah, so? I delivered to lots of places. Including the library? Rodriguez asked casually. Where Elena volunteered. A slight twitch at the corner of Cox's mouth was the only indication that the question had affected him. Maybe. I delivered all over. Rodriguez placed a photograph of Elena on the table. Did you know her? Cox barely glanced at the photo. Never seen her before. Hammond leaned forward. That's strange, because we found your fingerprint on her book. The book that was found scattered on the ground the night she disappeared. Cox's composure slipped for just a moment. His eyes widened before he regained control. I delivered to the library. Could have touched books there. This wasn't a library book, Rodriguez countered. It was her personal copy. And it was found at the scene where she was taken. The interview continued for hours, with Cox maintaining his innocence. He offered various explanations for the fingerprint. Perhaps he had handled the book during a delivery, maybe Elena had left it at the florist shop. None of his stories held up under scrutiny. Finally, as the interview concluded, Rodriguez laid out one final piece of information. We're reopening this investigation, Mr. Cox. We're going to be looking at evidence with new technology. DNA technology that wasn't available in 2001. Cox's face remained impassive, but his knuckles whitened as he gripped the edge of the table. Back in Cedar Springs, the investigation accelerated. The team revisited the original crime scene at Willow Creek Park, now transformed by 14 years of town development. They tracked down former employees of Bloom and Stem, seeking information about Cox's delivery routes and behavior. Most importantly, they began re-examining the physical evidence with new forensic techniques. The small blood sample found on the sidewalk, too minimal for DNA testing in 2001, was now potentially valuable. The criminologists in Austin used advanced PCR amplification to extract a partial DNA profile. While not complete enough for a definitive identification, it was sufficient for exclusionary purposes. When compared against a sample obtained from Cox's coffee cup during the Tulsa interview, the results were promising. The partial profile did not exclude him as a source. In simpler terms, Cox could have been the source of that blood, though the science couldn't yet prove it conclusively. Meanwhile, Rodriguez's team constructed a detailed timeline of Cox's movements in June 2001. Delivery logs showed he had indeed made regular stops at the library, typically in the afternoons. Several former library patrons recalled seeing a flower delivery man speaking with Elena on multiple occasions, though no one had thought it significant at the time. Most compelling was the testimony of Cox's former roommate, tracked down in Houston. Dave was weird about young girls, the man recalled uncomfortably. He had a thing for dark-haired teenagers. I remember him coming home late the night that girl went missing. His clothes were dirty, and he was acting strange, jumpy and agitated. He did laundry in the middle of the night, which he never did. The roommate hadn't connected these observations to Elena's disappearance at the time, and by the time he thought to mention it, he had assumed the case was solved or that police had already interviewed Cox. As evidence mounted, Rodriguez faced a difficult decision. They had a fingerprint match, a partial DNA match, circumstantial evidence, and witness testimony suggesting Cox had shown interest in Elena. But without a body or a confession, prosecuting a 14-year-old disappearance would be challenging. "We need to know what happened to her," Rodriguez told Hammond. "The family deserves that much." The team decided on a bold approach. With cooperation from Oklahoma authorities, they placed a trusted informant in Cox's cell block. The informant, a skilled conversationalist trained to elicit information without appearing to press for it, slowly gained Cox's confidence over several weeks. As Cox awaited trial for his assault case, he began to open up to his new friend about his past. He spoke vaguely about mistakes he had made, about urges he couldn't control. He mentioned Cedar Springs several times, always changing the subject quickly afterward. Then, in April 2015, the breakthrough came. During a late-night conversation, Cox, believing his cellmate was asleep, muttered something about the creek behind the park. The informant, instantly alert, carefully engaged Cox in conversation, expressing curiosity without suspicion. Over the next hour, thinking he was simply making conversation with a trustworthy friend, Cox revealed critical details. He described watching Elena at the library for weeks, learning her schedule, planning for the right moment. He mentioned the struggle when he grabbed her near the park, how she had fought back fiercely, scratching his face and drawing blood. Most importantly, he referred to that place out by Mason's Quarry where he had taken her afterward. Mason's Quarry was an abandoned limestone quarry about 15 miles outside Cedar Springs. It had been inactive since the 1980s, gradually filling with water and becoming a dangerous swimming hole for local teenagers. In 2001, the investigation had focused on more immediate areas around town, and the quarry had never been thoroughly searched. The day after receiving the informant's report, Rodriguez organized a search team. The quarry covered nearly 30 acres, with steep limestone walls and water depths reaching over 60 feet in some areas. The Texas Rangers brought in specialized equipment, sonar devices, underwater cameras, and cadaver dogs trained to detect human remains even after years underwater. For 3 days, the search teams methodically covered the quarry perimeter. On the eastern edge, partially concealed by thick brush, they discovered an access road that didn't appear on any maps, a narrow dirt path leading to a secluded cove away from the main quarry floor. There, beneath 14 years of accumulated soil and vegetation, they found what they had been seeking. Human remains, fragmentary but identifiable, buried in a shallow grave. Nearby lay a weathered red hairband, similar to the one found at the original scene, and small pieces of fabric consistent with the clothes Elena had been wearing when she disappeared. The remains were carefully excavated and transported to the state medical examiner's office. Dental records confirmed what everyone already knew: they had finally found Elena Ramirez. The discovery sent shockwaves through Cedar Springs. For many residents, Elena's disappearance had gradually transformed from a terrible tragedy to a sad but distant memory. Now, with excavation equipment visible at the quarry and news crews returning to town, old wounds reopened. The community that had slowly learned to move forward was suddenly thrust back to that terrible summer of 2001. For Sofia Ramirez, the news brought a complex storm of emotions. The confirmation of her daughter's death extinguished the tiny flame of hope she had nurtured for 14 years. Yet there was also a measure of relief in finally knowing, in having an answer after so many years of questions. "I always knew in my heart," she told Rodriguez quietly when he delivered the news. "But knowing for certain is different." Miguel, who had remarried and moved to Austin, drove back to Cedar Springs immediately upon hearing the news. He and Sofia sat together in their old living room, united in grief once more, looking through photo albums of their daughter's short life. With Elena's remains recovered and Cox's statements to the informant documented, Rodriguez had enough evidence to charge him with kidnapping and murder. In May 2015, Cox was extradited from Oklahoma to Texas to face prosecution for Elena's death. The district attorney assigned Catherine Martinez, an experienced prosecutor with a reputation for handling cold cases, to lead the case. Martinez spent weeks preparing, knowing that prosecuting a 14-year-old murder would present unique challenges. Physical evidence had degraded, witnesses' memories had faded, and many people connected to the original investigation had moved away or passed on. Cox's defense attorney, a public defender named James Wilson, argued vigorously for dismissal. The fingerprint could have an innocent explanation, he contended in pretrial motions. The statements to the informant were made without counsel present. The DNA evidence is partial at best. Judge Samuel Ramirez, no relation to the victim, denied the motions to dismiss but acknowledged the evidentiary challenges. "The prosecution bears a heavy burden," he warned Martinez. "This case will require more than circumstantial connections." As the trial date approached, Martinez secured one final piece of evidence. Advanced testing of soil samples from Cox's former vehicle, located in an Oklahoma salvage yard, revealed microscopic limestone particles consistent with the quarry site. While not definitive, it strengthened the connection between Cox and the location where Elena's remains were found. On September 8, 2015, almost exactly 14 years after Elena's disappearance, the trial of David Allen Cox began in the Cedar Springs courthouse. The small town's population had swelled with media representatives and curious onlookers. Sofia and Miguel sat in the front row, directly behind the prosecution table, their faces composed but eyes reflecting years of pain. Martinez's opening statement was powerful in its simplicity. 14 years ago, a 16-year-old girl walked home from the library and vanished into the night, she began. Today, we will show you how modern science, dedicated investigation, and David Cox's own words finally revealed the truth that has been hidden for too long. The prosecution presented a methodical case, beginning with the original investigation and evidence. Former Sheriff Hammond, now retired, testified about the discovery scene and the limitations of forensic technology in 2001. Rodriguez detailed the fingerprint match and subsequent investigation. The medical examiner explained how Elena's remains, though fragmented and weathered, still showed signs of traumatic injury consistent with homicide. Most compelling was the testimony of Cox's former roommate and the informant who had shared his cell. Their accounts painted a disturbing portrait of a man who had harbored violent impulses toward young women for years, who had specifically targeted Elena, and who had spoken about the quarry location where her remains were ultimately found. Throughout the proceedings, Cox sat motionless at the defense table, eyes downcast, occasionally whispering to his attorney but otherwise showing no reaction to the evidence against him. The defense strategy focused on time and uncertainty. Wilson emphasized the years that had passed, the fallibility of human memory, and the absence of direct evidence linking Cox to the actual murder. Fingerprints on a book do not prove murder, he argued. Conversations in a jail cell, potentially misremembered or misinterpreted, do not prove murder. As the trial entered its second week, Cox's demeanor began to change. He grew agitated, fidgeting in his seat and reacting visibly to certain testimony. When the forensic anthropologist detailed the condition of Elena's remains, Cox abruptly asked to speak with his attorney. After a brief consultation, Wilson requested a meeting with the judge and prosecutor. In chambers, he made an unexpected announcement: Cox wanted to change his plea. In exchange for pleading guilty to second-degree murder, Cox offered to provide a full confession and details about other potentially unsolved cases in towns where he had lived. The prosecution countered with a demand for a first-degree murder plea. After hours of negotiation, an agreement was reached. Cox would plead guilty to first-degree murder and receive a sentence of life without parole, avoiding the death penalty in exchange for his complete cooperation. The next day, a hushed courtroom watched as Cox stood before Judge Ramirez and uttered a single word: guilty. Sophia closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. Miguel reached across the gallery divider to grasp her hand. After 14 years, the word they had waited for, an acknowledgement of guilt, a confirmation of the truth they had always suspected. Cox's subsequent confession, recorded in the presence of his attorney, detailed the full horror of that June evening in 2001. He had watched Elena for weeks during his deliveries to the library, developing an obsession with the quiet, dark-haired teenager. On June 8, he parked his delivery van near Willow Creek Park, knowing Elena would walk past on her way home. When she appeared, he approached her with a story about a flower delivery he needed help with. Elena, always kind and helpful, paused to listen. When she realized his intentions and tried to flee, Cox grabbed her. During the struggle, her books scattered and her hairband tore loose. She scratched his face, drawing the blood found at the scene. Cox forced Elena into his van and drove to the quarry, where he had previously discovered the secluded access road. There, he committed the terrible crime he had planned. Afterward, he buried her body in a shallow grave where it remained hidden for 14 years. In a quiet corner of the Cedar Springs courthouse, Cox's confession continued, revealing disturbing details about his methodical planning and Elena's final moments. His emotionless recounting chilled everyone present, including seasoned investigators like Rodriguez. The confession video would never be made public, a small mercy for the Ramirez family. More shocking were Cox's revelations about other potential victims. He described 3 other incidents in different states where he had stalked teenage girls, though he claimed Elena was the only one he had killed. Texas Rangers immediately began coordinating with law enforcement agencies in Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Louisiana to investigate these cold cases. On October 12, 2015, David Allen Cox stood before Judge Ramirez for sentencing. The courtroom was packed with Cedar Springs residents who had lived with the shadow of Elena's disappearance for 14 years. Sophia and Miguel sat together in the front row, flanked by close friends who had supported them throughout their ordeal. Before the judge announced the agreed-upon sentence, he offered the Ramirez family an opportunity to speak. Sophia rose slowly, her hand trembling slightly as she unfolded a small piece of paper. Instead of reading from it, she looked directly at Cox, who kept his eyes downcast. For 14 years, she began, her voice stronger than anyone expected, I have imagined what I would say to the person who took my daughter. I imagine anger and hatred in terrible words. She paused, taking a deep breath. But standing here now, I feel only sadness. Sadness for my Elena, who deserved her full life. Sadness for us, who had to live with this emptiness. And yes, even sadness for you, Mr. Cox, because whatever brokenness led you to do this terrible thing has destroyed many lives, including your own. The courtroom was utterly silent as Sophia continued. I do not forgive you. I cannot. But I will not let hatred consume what remains of my life. Elena would not want that. Today, justice is finally being served, and I hope that somewhere, my beautiful daughter knows that we never stopped looking for her, never stopped loving her, and never stopped fighting for her truth. As Sophia returned to her seat, many in the courtroom were openly weeping. Miguel declined to speak, instead placing a supportive arm around his ex-wife's shoulders, a gesture of unity in their shared grief. Judge Ramirez then addressed Cox directly. Mr. Cox, your actions took not only Elena Ramirez's life but also stole 14 years of peace from her family and this community. The sentence of this court is life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. May God have mercy on your soul. The gavel's sharp crack echoed through the courtroom, signaling the end of a case that had haunted Cedar Springs for over a decade. As Cox was led away in handcuffs, the collective tension in the room visibly eased. Many people embraced the Ramirez family, offering long-delayed condolences now that the truth was finally known. Outside the courthouse, Lieutenant Rodriguez faced a swarm of reporters. "Today brings a measure of justice for Elena Ramirez and her family," he stated. "This case demonstrates that no matter how much time passes, we will not stop pursuing the truth." Modern forensic techniques, combined with dedicated investigation, can solve cases once thought hopeless. The following day, Cedar Springs began the process of healing, not just from the recent trial, but from the 14 years of uncertainty and fear that had subtly transformed the town. Mayor Gonzalez announced plans for a memorial garden to be established in Willow Creek Park, near where Elena had disappeared. The garden would honor not only Elena but all victims of violence, serving as both remembrance and promise. For Sophia and Miguel, the trial's conclusion brought a different kind of grief, one with clarity and finality, but grief nonetheless. They now had answers, but those answers confirmed their worst fears. In the days following the sentencing, they faced the difficult task of planning a proper funeral for their daughter, 14 years after her death. On a crisp autumn morning, Cedar Springs gathered at St. Michael's Church for Elena's funeral service. The small church overflowed with mourners, many of whom had participated in the original search parties or attended the annual vigils. Elena's high school friends, now in their 30s with families of their own, came to pay respects to the girl they had never forgotten. Father Martinez spoke of healing, of justice, and of remembrance. "Elena's story is now complete," he said. "Not the story we would have wished for her, but one that ultimately revealed truth and brought a measure of peace. Her memory will continue to live in this community, not just as a tragedy, but as a reminder of how we came together in our darkest hour." After the service, a small procession made its way to Cedar Springs Cemetery, where Elena was finally laid to rest. As the cemetery workers lowered her casket, containing both her recovered remains and personal mementos from her bedroom, which Sophia had preserved all these years, Miguel and Sophia each placed a single white rose atop it. Together, they whispered a final goodbye to their daughter. In the months that followed, the impact of the case extended far beyond Cedar Springs. Lieutenant Rodriguez was invited to speak at law enforcement conferences across the country, sharing how modern forensic techniques had solved a 14-year-old cold case. The Cedar Springs Police Department received grants to upgrade their evidence processing facilities and train officers in the latest investigative techniques. Sophia transformed her Elena's Angels Safety Program into a non-profit organization dedicated to child safety education and supporting families of missing children. The program expanded to schools throughout Texas, with plans for nationwide implementation. In each presentation, Sophia shared Elena's story, turning her personal tragedy into a mission to protect other children. Miguel, who had struggled for years with unresolved grief, found a new purpose. He joined a national organization that helped coordinate volunteer search efforts for missing persons. His mechanical expertise proved valuable in maintaining equipment used by search teams, and his personal experience made him an empathetic presence for families going through similar ordeals. The Memorial Garden in Willow Creek Park became a peaceful refuge, featuring a bronze statue of a young woman reading a book, not specifically Elena, but a tribute to all young lives cut short. Surrounding the statue were benches and flowering plants, creating a space for reflection and remembrance. Schools often brought students there for outdoor reading sessions, ensuring that the space remained alive with the voices and laughter of young people. As for David Allen Cox, his confession led to the resolution of two other cold cases, teenage girls who had disappeared in towns where he had lived, though he had not killed them as he initially claimed. In both cases, he had stalked and frightened the girls before moving on to new locations. This pattern of escalating behavior culminating in Elena's murder confirmed what investigators had suspected. Cox was a predator who had honed his methods over time before finally acting on his darkest impulses. In late 2016, the national news program 2020 featured the Ramirez case in a special episode titled Cold Case Justice. The program highlighted the advances in forensic science that had made the breakthrough possible, as well as the unwavering dedication of investigators like Rodriguez and Hammond. Sophia and Miguel participated in the program, sharing their journey from devastating loss through years of uncertainty to final resolution. The not knowing was almost worse than the truth, Sophia explained during her interview. Living every day wondering if Elena might still be out there somewhere, if she might walk through the door. The truth is painful, but it allowed us to finally grieve properly. The program brought national attention to cold case investigation techniques and inspired several other police departments to re-examine unsolved missing persons cases with new technology. In the year following the broadcast, at least 3 other long-dormant cases across the country were solved using similar forensic approaches. One of the most unexpected outcomes of the case resolution came in early 2017, when Sophia received a letter from a young woman named Isabella Martinez. Isabella explained that she had been a freshman at Cedar Springs High when Elena disappeared and had been deeply affected by the tragedy. The fear and uncertainty had inspired her to pursue a career in forensic science. Now, at 29, she was working in the state crime lab in Austin, the same lab that had processed the evidence leading to Cox's arrest. Sophia invited Isabella to visit, and they formed a bond based on their connection to Elena's case. Isabella shared how advances in DNA technology had made the breakthrough possible, explaining the science in terms Sophia could understand. For Sophia, meeting someone whose life path had been shaped by her daughter's story was both painful and profoundly meaningful, evidence that Elena's short life had created lasting ripples in the world. By the 5th anniversary of Cox's conviction in 2020, Cedar Springs had changed significantly. The population had grown as families from San Antonio's expanding suburbs sought the small-town atmosphere. New businesses lined Main Street, and a community college branch had opened on the north side of town. Yet Elena's story remained an integral part of the town's identity. Each year on June 8, the anniversary of her disappearance, schools and businesses observed Elena Ramirez Day, dedicated to community safety awareness and remembrance. Children wore red bands in their hair or around their wrists, a reference to Elena's signature red hairband, and participated in age-appropriate safety education programs developed by Sophia's nonprofit. In Cedar Springs High School, a scholarship in Elena's name was awarded annually to a student planning to pursue education, honoring her dream of becoming a teacher. The school library, where she had spent so many afternoons volunteering, dedicated a special collection of classic literature in her memory, featuring multiple copies of Pride and Prejudice, her favorite book. Sophia, who had feared that Elena would be forgotten as time passed, found comfort in these ongoing tributes. "My daughter lives on in this community," she told a local reporter during the 2020 memorial event. "Not in the way we would have chosen, but in a way that continues to make a difference in people's lives." The Cedar Springs Police Department, too, had been permanently changed by the case. A dedicated cold case unit was established, focused on reviewing unsolved crimes with new technological approaches. The evidence room was modernized, with climate-controlled storage and digital tracking systems ensuring that no potentially valuable evidence would be overlooked or degraded over time. Sheriff Tom Collins, who had been a young deputy during the original investigation and had risen through the ranks in the years since, made cold case resolution a departmental priority. "We learned from Elena's case that justice delayed doesn't have to mean justice denied," he explained during a community meeting. "Every unsolved case is a family waiting for answers, and we owe them our best efforts, no matter how much time has passed." The broader impact of the case extended to law enforcement practices across Texas. The State Bureau of Investigation developed a protocol for regularly reviewing cold cases with new forensic techniques, rather than waiting for case-by-case requests. This systematic approach led to breakthroughs in several long-dormant investigations, bringing closure to other families who had waited years for answers. For Lieutenant Rodriguez, who had been instrumental in solving the case, the experience shaped the remainder of his career. He became the head of the Texas Rangers Cold Case Unit, specializing in applying modern forensic techniques to seemingly hopeless cases. Under his leadership, the unit resolved over a dozen long unsolved murders and disappearances throughout Texas. When Rodriguez spoke about the Ramirez case at training seminars, he always emphasized the human element alongside the technical aspects. The fingerprint technology and DNA analysis were crucial, he would explain. But equally important was remembering that this wasn't just an interesting puzzle to solve. It was about Elena, about her parents, about a community that needed healing. That's what drives us to keep pushing when cases go cold, knowing there are real people waiting for answers. In 2021, 20 years after Elena's disappearance, Sophia finally made a decision she had been contemplating for years. After maintaining Elena's bedroom as a shrine for 2 decades, preserving everything exactly as it had been on that June morning in 2001, she decided it was time to let go. With the help of her closest friends and a grief counselor, Sophia carefully sorted through Elena's possessions. Some items, the journals, the favorite books, the quinceañera dress, she kept in a special memory chest. Others she donated to Elena's angels, to be used in their educational programs or given to children in need. The room was repainted and refurnished as a guest bedroom, though a small shelf displayed a few of Elena's favorite things and her photograph. The change represented Sophia's ongoing healing process, not forgetting Elena, but finding a healthier way to honor her memory while continuing to live her own life. That same year, Sophia received unexpected news from Miguel. His volunteer work with search organizations had led him to Honduras, where he had met and fallen in love with a local teacher named Carmela. They had married in a small ceremony, and Miguel wanted Sophia to be among the first to know. Sophia's initial reaction was complicated, a mixture of genuine happiness for her ex-husband and a twinge of something like betrayal, as if Miguel were leaving Elena behind by building this new life. But after reflection, she sent a warm message of congratulations, recognizing that healing took different forms for different people. When Miguel and Carmela visited Cedar Springs later that year, Sophia welcomed them into her home. The 3 adults sat in the living room, sharing memories of Elena and stories of their lives in the years since. There was sadness, but also laughter, something that had been rare in the Ramirez home for many years. Carmela, a gentle woman who had lost her brother to violence years earlier, understood the complex grief that both Miguel and Sophia carried. She didn't try to replace Elena in Miguel's heart but instead helped him carry his memories with more peace than pain. By 2023, the Ramirez case had become a standard teaching example in forensic science programs across the country. Students studied how the partial fingerprint, deemed insufficient in 2001, had become key evidence when re-examined with modern enhancement techniques. They learned about the evolution of DNA analysis that had made it possible to extract useful information from the minute blood sample found at the scene. In Cedar Springs, the impact of Elena's case continued to resonate through community initiatives. The town implemented a comprehensive safety network, including well-lit walking paths, emergency call boxes in parks, and a volunteer escort service for anyone walking alone after dark. These measures reflected a community determined to prevent another tragedy like Elena's. Sophia, now in her 60s, gradually reduced her direct involvement with Elena's angels as younger staff took on more responsibilities. She remained the organization's heart and inspiration, but she also began to explore other aspects of life that had been overshadowed by grief and advocacy for so many years. She took art classes, traveled to places she had always wanted to see, and built new friendships that weren't defined by her tragedy. One crisp autumn day in 2024, Sophia visited Elena's grave, as she did every few weeks. She carefully arranged fresh flowers in the small vase beside the headstone, which bore a simple inscription, Elena Maria Ramirez, 1985 to 2001. Beloved daughter. Forever in our hearts. As Sophia sat on the small bench near the grave, she noticed a young woman placing flowers at a nearby headstone. The woman looked vaguely familiar, and after a moment, Sophia realized it was one of Elena's former classmates, now middle-aged with streaks of gray in her hair. They recognized each other simultaneously, exchanging gentle smiles of acknowledgement. The woman approached Sophia's bench. Mrs. Ramirez? I'm Claire Peterson. I was in Elena's English class. Sophia nodded, gesturing for Claire to join her. I remember you. You came to the house after it happened. Claire sat beside Sophia, her eyes moving to Elena's headstone. I think about her often. My daughter is 16 now, the same age Elena was. Sometimes when I look at my daughter, I wonder about all the things Elena might have become. They talked quietly for nearly an hour, sharing memories of Elena and reflections on how her story had shaped their lives in different ways. For Claire, Elena's disappearance had made her a more protective parent, but she struggled to balance safety with allowing her children independence. For Sophia, the journey from loss through uncertainty to resolution had ultimately led to a kind of peace she had once thought impossible. As they parted, Claire hesitated, then asked a question that caught Sophia off guard. Do you think Elena would be proud of how Cedar Springs changed after what happened to her? Of how her story made the town safer, brought people together? Sophia considered the question carefully. I think she would be amazed by it all. Elena was a quiet girl who never sought attention. The idea that her name is known throughout Texas, that there are scholarships and gardens and safety programs because of her, it would overwhelm her. Sophia smiled sadly. But yes, I think she would be proud that something good came from something so terrible. That was who she was. That evening, Sophia sat on her porch watching the sunset paint the Texas sky in brilliant oranges and purples. She thought about the long journey from that terrible night in 2001 to the present moment, the years of desperate searching, the crushing uncertainty, the painful truth, and finally, the slow process of healing. Elena's story had not ended as anyone would have wished. Yet through modern science, dedicated investigation, and a community that refused to forget, justice had eventually been served. More importantly, Elena's brief life had created lasting change, in law enforcement practices, in community safety, in the lives of countless children protected by the programs bearing her name. Sophia closed her eyes, feeling the warm evening breeze against her face. In her mind, she saw Elena as she had been, 16, smiling, full of quiet dreams and simple joys. We found you, she whispered. And we made sure you were remembered. That's all we could do, my sweet girl. I hope it was enough. Across town, in the Cedar Springs Police Department, a young officer carefully placed a case file in the archives. The label read Ramirez, Elena Resolved 2015. Unlike the dusty storage of years past, these archives were state-of-the-art, preserving evidence and documentation indefinitely. The officer paused, her hand lingering on the file. During her training, she had studied this case extensively, the disappearance that had changed a town, the cold case breakthrough that had transformed investigative practices, the family that had never stopped seeking answers. As she closed the cabinet, she silently reaffirmed the promise that had become central to the department's philosophy: no case truly ends until justice is served. No matter how many years pass. No matter how cold the trail grows. Every victim deserves answers, and every family deserves the truth. In Cedar Springs and beyond, Elena Ramirez's legacy lived on, not only in memorial gardens and safety programs, but in a fundamental shift in how communities protected their vulnerable members and how law enforcement approached seemingly unsolvable cases. A single life, though cut tragically short, had created ripples of change that continued to spread, touching countless others in ways that could never be fully measured. The truth had come late, but it had come. And in that truth, an entire community had found not only closure, but transformation. Elena's story was one of terrible loss, but also of remarkable impact, proof that even the darkest tragedy can ultimately lead to light. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.